Hi there, it's Nicole for Simon Says Stamp with a Simon Says Stamp STAMPtember project featuring the Gina K Joy of the Season limited edition exclusive stamp set. This is an awesome collaboration between Simon Says Stamp and Gina K Designs, and I'm going to be creating some alcohol ink lift techniques here with alcohol inks and the alcohol lift ink pad. I'm going to start with some UPO paper and the Gina K stamp set. And I'm going to create several backgrounds and then do the lift technique. And the fantastic thing about the lift technique is it allows you to create two cards in one. So if you have some just regular plain old white cardstock, I'm going to be using Nina Solar White heavyweight cardstock. We will first stamp the image with the alcohol lift ink on the alcohol inked background, and then we're going to take that and stamp it on smooth white cardstock, and it will give a fantastic result. Two different looks and two cards in one. My first color combination for my background is Clover, Aqua, Pool, and the Silver Metallic Mixative. I'm simply moving those inks around, or applying the inks rather to my paper, kind of just messy, adding those colors. Then I'm going to take a little bit of the ink blending solution and add drops of that all over. And then nothing fancy today, no special tools. I'm going to use a straw to blow that ink around, get some fun movement until I'm happy with how the background looks. I'll be creating 3 different color ways today. I'm only going to actually use 2 in the video, and that's only because the second one that I'm going to show you here in a minute, which actually ended up being one of my very favorites. All 3 are my favorites. These are all some of my very favorite color combinations. But it was the first image I stamped, and it ended up not working out so well. That's why I did so many backgrounds when I did these here. I actually created multiples off camera. And that was because I was a little bit afraid of that. And so I ended up just using 2 of the other color backgrounds for my card instead. And we'll use the green, the leftover green piece from that other panel I did for another project at another time. What I love about alcohol inks is they are super forgiving. So if you don't exactly get the kind of background you want right off the bat, you can wipe it off with an alcohol, rubbing alcohol swab. You can take your felt ink blending tool, make sure it's the felt on the end of that and not the foam, and you can wipe it up and wipe it, kind of smooth everything out and start over. And you're going to see that here. I've got a felt pad on my ink blending tool, and I had accidentally grabbed, I think it was white or pearl mixative, I'm not exactly sure. And I hadn't mixed it up well. And you saw it kind of have those stringy things, and it really just kind of messed up the whole look. So I smoothed it out, and I'm just going to add ink right on top of that and work with this again. This is Clover, Citrus, Aqua, and the Silver Metallic Mixative. All of my backgrounds have Silver Metallic Mixative in them today. I think it really adds to the holiday feel for these cards. Quite a lot of product then on this panel. I am working on the Tim Holtz glass mat, which is super easy to clean up. All I did was take a paper towel with a little rubbing alcohol and wipe up anything left over on my mat after my backgrounds had dried. So that is an awesome way, awesome work surface, I guess I should say, if you're working with alcohol inks. I did try a little pearl mixative. This was totally one of those backgrounds that kind of didn't go as planned, but I ended up really loving. Let's blow that around a little bit again because those droplets were a little bit more than I wanted. In fact, it needs a little more ink blending solution, or a lot more, as the case may be. to get those colors moving again and smooth some of those harsh circle lines out. And then we're going to let this one dry all the way. Now my next color combination is a little bit different, and this is what I used for the snowflake background card that you saw at the beginning of the video. This is Purple Twilight, Aqua, Pool, and the Silver Metallic Mixative. I hesitate to say my favorite because I really liked all three for different reasons, and all of them are favorite color combinations. But I think that Purple Twilight, surprisingly enough, because if you've seen any of my videos, you've probably heard me say this many times, purple tends to not be my favorite color. And there are times where I go in phases where I really love purple, and I don't know what it is. This is one of them. I think it really works well. It's really effective with the snowflake background, and it has enough of a bluish tint to it, I guess I want to say, that this really works nicely, and it looks fantastic with the silver mixative. So let's go ahead and put together our Believe cards with the snowflake backgrounds. I think it's the easiest to use a stamp positioner tool with the alcohol lift ink. It makes it really easy to know exactly where you're stamping, not only on the alcohol inked background, but also your smooth white cardstock. I would also suggest trimming your smooth white cardstock to exactly the same size panel you're using to stamp the alcohol lift ink, the alcohol inked background, so that it's exactly the same in both areas. I did not do that when I started, and I'm going to show you that midway through, because it kind of does make a difference. Now, my stamps picked up a little of the ink. They're brand new. I just peeled them off the stamp sheet, so I'm going to clean those. You do not want any of the ink getting on your alcohol lift ink pad. This is a felt ink pad, and so I don't want any of that color transferring to it. Now I'm going to stamp my snowflakes from the Gina K STAMPtember Joy of the Season stamp set with that ink, and then press it into my alcohol inked background. You can see that there's a little bit of a ghost image there. If you rub this and pick up the wet ink with a dry paper towel, and I do this several times, kind of flipping it to a clean area of the paper towel, how much better the image shows up. A beautiful ghosted image here on these alcohol inked backgrounds. Now I'm going to take my smooth white cardstock and press those snowflakes right into that, and look at the purple and blue designs of those. Isn't that so pretty? Completely different look, and you get two in one. Now for this card, I wanted my background panel to be completely covered in snowflakes, and to do that I'm going to have to move my snowflakes throughout the panel to fill it in. So I need to clean those really good. I'm using the Stays On cleaner to remove that ink from my stamps. I'm going to grab my alcohol inked background again, place those snowflakes down. Where possible, I tried to do both of them at one time so that I could cover as much ground as possible. I'm really pressing a lot of ink onto there. Then pressing that into my alcohol inked background, pressing pretty hard. I find I get better results if I press kind of hard. Let's grab our paper towel and lift up that ink from our background. I'm going to do this again several times, and as I remove more and more of that ink, you see the beautiful design take shape, and then press that into our smooth white cardstock. I am going to keep doing this until I fill in enough of the area. Now, I mentioned a minute ago, and I want to mention again, I think if I would do this again, and you're going to see this in the next card example, I would have trimmed this down before stamping. It would make it a lot easier to know exactly how much area I need to cover. I can pretty much guess, but it would have been much simpler if I had trimmed it to A2 size, because I want my panel to be A2 sized, and we're going to do a little inlay technique, add a die cut greeting, and then add a stamped greeting from the Gina K Joy of the Season stamp set. Look how pretty these snowflakes are. I just think this is a beautiful technique, and the snowflakes and the trees both worked perfectly for this. Okay, here's an example because I did not trim my white cardstock to the right size. I need to do that now. I can guess about, I can measure my background panel size, but also it's easy to guess because the snowflakes cut off certain areas. So I trimmed that down, and then I'm able to stamp and fill in the rest of my background. So you can see I about have the whole thing filled in and ready to go. Looks like maybe just a couple more areas that I need to add a snowflake, or one more area maybe. Let's add one here. And then we can start putting it all together. So we're going to go ahead and add our greetings and everything to finish up this card. So just dabbing up, finishing, getting rid of the rest of that alcohol lift ink, and then we can trim both of these panels down to A2 sized, which is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. So look at these two completely different backgrounds. So pretty. I just love this technique. I went ahead and put both of my backgrounds together, and I'm going to trim them down so they're exactly the same. And then we're going to do an inlay technique for both, that while the backgrounds look completely different, one's very dark in color and one is got a white background with color snowflakes, exact same design. And I'm choosing now what greeting I want to use with my background. I am using my favorite Simon Says Stamp thin frame. I've die cut that from some silver metallic cardstock, and then I've die cut, or I'm going to run the die cut through using my background this time to remove a thin little frame from that. And I'll show you what I mean here. So I've got my side fold card base, and I like to cover this with a nice strong adhesive. We're going to replace our outer border first. Then we're going to just draw a thin line of glue and replace that silver metallic frame next, and finish with our inside panel. So that frame just kind of breaks up the background and instantly adds interest. This is one of my favorite go-to techniques. Several companies have these little thin frames like this. There are lots and lots of ways to do the inlay using these thin frames. I just think it's a really effective, very simple technique that looks very elegant and very put together and polished. I have die cut the word believe from the Simon Says Stamp Believe dies 3 times from smooth white cardstock, and I'm gluing them one on top of another. This is to give it a little bit more of a substantial look and help it pop off of the background a little bit more. I've also die cut the shadow for the word from the silver metallic cardstock. And I'm going to layer this on top of that to really show off this sentiment. And the background, I guess I want to say, is the star of the show here. So the sentiments are all that is really needed. We're going to do some very simple embellishing after we get our sentiments added. I did stamp and emboss the sentiment from the STAMPtember Joy of the Season on some vellum. Then I trimmed it out with a sentiment label die, ran that through my Xyron sticker maker so that there is a layer of adhesive all over the back of this, and I don't have to worry about hiding adhesive anywhere, and then kind of tucking it under that bottom edge of the Believe die. To finish off the card, I will add a few rhinestones here and there, and the design is finished. Next, let's do the tree background, and for this one I did trim down my backgrounds to A2 size right off the bat. The difference with this one is this is a really good example of maybe you don't get enough of the alcohol lift ink the first time. So let's ink up the tree. This is a pretty big image, so it takes a little bit more pressure, I think, to get a really good ghosted image here on our alcohol ink background. I'm using quite a bit of pressure pressing down here to press that ink into the alcohol ink to lift it up. Then I'm going to swap it out and stamp this on my smooth white cardstock that I have there to the right that I already have ready to go. But it's a little bit hard to see the trees there even yet on my alcohol inked background, which you can probably see. I haven't used my paper towel yet, but I can tell already that it's not going to be enough, that it's not lifted enough of the ink to really showcase those trees. And it's confirmed when I pull out my white cardstock and you can see all those faint areas. Really hard to see the trees. They're not really crisp. So before I stamp this again, I'm going to take my dry paper towel. I'm going to dab up the lift ink that's already on the panel. And then we are going to stamp this again and see if we get a better result. So if you don't get a really good ghosted result the first time, don't be afraid to stamp it again. This is also where a stamp positioner comes in really handy. Remember to clean your stamp. I'm using that StazOn ink cleaner because we don't want to transfer the ink to our alcohol lift ink pad. Make sure it's really good and dry. And then press that ink into the stamp again. And then we are going to stamp this one more time. Twice worked for me. There may be times you have to do it more. I don't know. This worked really well. You're going to see in the finished card that the trees really show up. Even when I open this, you can already see that it's going to be much better stamped impression. Let's line up our white panel and stamp that again as well. This is also going to be a much better impression. Those lighter areas are where the ink is lighter on the panel anyway. There's not a lot you can do about that. And then let's take our dry paper towel and pick up or lift that wet ink off of our background panel. And make sure we get it all. And as I'm lifting that ink up, you can see those trees really take shape. Such a pretty background. I just love this. Now the trees are kind of hanging out in the middle of this panel. It's not an edge-to-edge design like the snowflakes. So this is where the frame is going to come in handy because that's going to help ground the trunks of those trees. What I decided to do for these two cards is on the white panel, instead of leaving it a white border, which would be okay, but I felt like it was a little plain, a little boring, and not that interesting. I had several extra alcohol inked backgrounds, and so I'm going to die cut this from one of those as well, and we're going to replace the outer frame with an alcohol inked frame, then do the inlay silver frame, and then the inside panel for that one. We're also going to add a really simple greeting stamped and embossed on vellum, trimmed a little bit to just kind of go along that bottom edge. I'm adding some little white dots to the alcohol inked background to give it the look of falling snow. And then we will finish this with a scattering of silver mini star confetti. Very simple embellishment, but effective, so pretty, looks fantastic on the finished card. And this white opaque pen really shows up well. It gives the illusion of snow all over, which I love. On the white background panel, I probably could have stamped the greeting directly on the background. In fact, on the snowflake card, you guys might have noticed that I did stamp the sentiment. It was the exact same sentiment directly onto my background with black ink because it layered over it and was easy to read. I decided to go ahead and do the vellum circle again. So I'm die cutting a vellum circle using a stitched circle die from Simon Says Stamp. And then I'm just going to switch up my sentiment here and do Season's Greetings. There's several greetings here. I just want to pick something that's going to fit. We'll stamp this with the clear embossing ink, but instead of embossing with white, I'm going to emboss with silver to match the silver frame, and I think the silver is going to show up a lot better over the white background. I just want to trim off that bottom edge to ground it along the silver inlay frame. I ran it through the Xyron sticker maker, popped it in place, and then for this card, because the background's white, you really can't add white dots because they aren't going to show up. I'm going to just add that scattering of silver mini star confetti all over. I'm using Ranger Multi-Matte Medium to add little drops of glue and a jewel picker to pick them up and put them in place. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for this set of 4 cards featuring alcohol lift ink techniques over alcohol ink backgrounds using the Simon Says Stamp and Gina K Designs STAMPtember Joy of the Season stamp set. The supplies I used to create these cards are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Here are a couple more cards featuring Simon Says Stamp STAMPtember stamps and dies you might be interested in. Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.